In this video, we will review solving linear equations, which is a required skill upon entering Math 120. So let's review some steps. The first step when solving an equation is to see if anything can be simplified. So step one is to simplify. So if we take a look at example 1, the first step is to simplify. So let's see if anything can be simplified here. So this equal sign breaks this problem into two parts. And if we look at the left side, we have like terms. We can combine x's together as long as they have the same exponent and variable. So 3 minus 11 is negative 8x. Then we're going to bring down the plus 5 and the 29. So that was step 1. Step 2, we are going to do what I call cover up the variable term. So if you have a highlighter, what I would suggest is for you to highlight where the variable is. So if we take a look at example 1 here, we're going to highlight the 8x, the negative 8x. So that is step 2. And then we want what we highlighted all by itself. So I want this negative 8x here all by itself. So to make the highlighted what we covered up and highlighted by itself, we're going to have to get rid of this plus 5. So if we take 5 away on the left side, we have a positive 5 and a negative 5 that makes 0. And whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other side to keep it balanced. So here we have 29 minus 5, which is 24. Okay, then the very last thing you're going to do when you solve an equation is to see or if there's anything to divide by itself. So if we look at this equation right here, the very last step, when the variable term is all by itself, the last step is to divide by itself. So we're going to divide both sides by a negative 8. And the reason why we do that is because what's going on right here is negative 8 divided by negative 8. And we know that negative 8 divided by negative 8 is 1. So in other words, we're figuring out what 1x is equal to. So 24 divided by negative 8 is negative 3. So we get our solution. Now when you do, there's 4 homework problems assigned online for this topic. And when you do your homework for this section, you will have to enter in your answers for this in these curly brackets here. This just represents, and there's no way I can take this off, Connect Math uses these brackets here to represent the solution set, and then you put your answer inside them. So that's just saying that the solution to this problem is negative 3. So make sure you enter these brackets in when you're entering your answer when you do your homework. Now keep in mind the nice thing about solving equations is that you can always check your answers. So since we got our answer of negative 3, that means x, wherever there's an x in this problem here. So I'm going to bring down my equation, and wherever there's an x, I'm going to replace it with the solution we got, which was negative 3. So we're going to plug in a negative 3 and simplify. So 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. And then here, we always remember from Math 092, we always look in front of a number to tell if it's negative or positive. So here we have a negative 11 times a negative 3, which is positive 33. And then we bring down the plus 5. Okay, now we're going to combine our like terms here. So negative 9 plus 33, which is 24, and then plus 5, we get 29 on both sides. So we know our answer is correct. Now, I'm not going to do the check step for every single problem, but keep in mind that you can check all of these. All right, let's take a look at number 2. So solve the equation. So first thing, we're going to see if we can simplify. So if I look at the left side of this equation here, I cannot do negative 6x minus 5. We cannot do that because one has an x and one does not have an x. So we can't simplify on the left, and there's nothing to simplify on the right. There's just a negative 9. So step 1, we're going to go ahead and skip. We don't need to do it. Step 2, we're going to find the variable, and we're going to highlight it. And if you don't have a highlighter, you could circle it. And whatever's next to it here, we need to remove. So if we have a negative 5, then we need to add 5 so that these will cancel and make 0. And whatever we put on one side, we have to do to the other side. And negative 9 plus 5 is negative 4. Okay, so step 2, we are done. Step 3 is we are going to divide. So when this is by itself, that is when we are allowed to divide. So since in front of the x, we don't want that negative 6 there, and this says negative 6 times x, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to divide. And remember, the reason why we're dividing again is that a negative 6 divided by a negative 6 is 1x, and that's what we want to know, what 1x is equal to. Now here we're dividing, so we know that a negative 4 divided by another negative makes a positive. So this answer is going to be a positive, and 6 can't go into 4 evenly. So our answer is 4, 6, since 6 can't divide into 4. But we know that we always simplify fractions. So instead of putting the answer as 4, 6, we're going to simplify it by dividing the common factor of 2 out, and we will get 2/3. Now, if you were actually to do 4 divided by 6, your calculator would say 0.6666, etc. Now, if we look at the directions here, it says leave your answer as an integer. So an integer would be like the answer we got for example 1. This is an integer right here. So an integer means when you divide, the number goes into the top number evenly with no remainder. The answer that we got here, 2/3, it says or a simplified fraction. So that is how we know not to leave our answer as a decimal, but to leave it as 2/3. Alrighty, example 3. So the first step is we are going to simplify. So there is a number right next to parentheses, so we know that is the distributive property. And remember, the distributive property just says to take that 4 and you're going to multiply it to the numbers inside the parentheses, or the terms inside the parentheses. So 4 times 2 is 8, and then bring down the x, and then 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. And then we cannot put these two terms together. They're on the same side of the equal sign, but we can't put them together because one has an x and one does not. And 5x plus 3, we can't put those together because one has an x and one does not. So we are completely done with simplifying. Now we need to cover up the variable. But there's a problem. There's 2 of them. So we can't cover up the variable. There's more than one. So that is our clue that something is wrong and we need to remove one of them. It does not matter which one we remove. So I'm going to take out the 5x. So to take out the 5x, I'm going to subtract 5x to make it 0x. And whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. Now the reason why I'm putting the negative 5x underneath the 8x is because these are like terms. So I'm not going to combine the negative 5x with the negative 12 because they're not like terms. So that's why I write it underneath here. So now I'm going to combine the 8x and the negative 5x, and that makes 3x. Alrighty, now we have the variable all by itself. So we cover it up and we look right next to it, and whatever's next to it we need to remove. So since that's a negative 12, I need to add 12 to make it 0. Okay, now step 2 is completed. We have the variable term all by itself, and now step 3 we are allowed to divide by itself. So we get x equals 3 goes into 15 5 times. So we get x equals 5. And remember, in connect, you will enter that answer in these brackets here. All right, let's take a look at example 4. The first step is to simplify, which we cannot combine these together. There's nothing to simplify on the right side here. So now we move on to step 2. So we highlight where the variable term is, and whatever's next to it we need to remove. So we're going to remove the 19 by subtracting 19. Bring down the rest of the problem. And then step 2 is completed because we now have the variable all by itself. So now that the variable is all by itself, we need to divide. But since this is a fraction, you should know from previous math classes that dividing is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So if we go back to our steps here, when we're asked to divide, if the number in front of the variable is a fraction, we're really going to multiply by the reciprocal. So if it was 2/5 x, you're going to multiply by 5/2. So the reciprocal is when you switch the numerator and the denominator. If it was negative 3/4 x, then you would multiply by negative 4/3. So you're just switching the numerator and the denominator values. So in this problem here, to get rid of this 2/5, we're going to multiply by 5/2. And again, the reason why that works is 5 times 2 is 10, and 2 times 5 is 10, and 10 divided by 10 is just 1. So we have gotten the x to just be 1x. And whatever we do to one side, we have to do the other. So we're going to multiply both sides by 5/2. Again, this cancels out, just leaving us the x. And then here we're multiplying 5/2 by 40. Now remember, when you're multiplying with fractions, that you are allowed to cross simplify. So you look at this denominator here and the numerator here, and I know that 2 goes into both of them. So I could essentially, I'm dividing by 2 here to make that a 1. And I'm going to divide the 40 by 2 and make that 20. And then when you multiply with fractions, you multiply straight across. So I have 20 times 5 is 100. And then a negative times a positive fraction would be a negative. So we get x equals negative 100. All right, last question here. So this problem has all fractions within it. So one way to do this is you can follow the steps that we've been following, which we can't simplify this, so we skip step 1. So step 2 is we cover up the variable term and we look next to it, and that tells us what to get rid of. So we're going to subtract 1/2. And then we're going to have to do 5/6 minus 1/2. And then multiply by 3/2 to both sides. So that's one way to follow the normal equation steps. Or another way we can do it is called clearing the denominator. So clearing the denominator will get rid of fractions. So what you need to do is you need to look at your equation and look at all the denominators and ask yourself, what's the least common multiple? What number can 3, 2, and 6 all go into? So there's several answers. You could pick 24, you can pick 12, you could pick 48, but the least one will make it easier. So I'm going to go with 6 because I know 3 can go into 6, 2 can go into 6, and 6 can go into itself. So now that I have figured out that the good number to use is 6, I'm going to multiply the whole entire equation by 6. Now I can do that easily in my head because since I picked this number 6, and remember whatever you do to one side you have to do to the other, when I multiply both sides by 6, the denominator, if we take a look at 2/3, this 3 will cancel out because it goes into 6 twice. And then I'm going to multiply the numerator 2 by 2. So again, 3 goes into 6 twice. So I'm going to multiply 2 times 2, which is 4. And then I'm going to bring down the p. And then here, 2 goes into 6. 2 goes into 6 3 times. So I'm going to multiply the numerator 1 by 3 and get 3. And then here I have 6, and 6 goes into 6 1 time. So I'm going to multiply the numerator by 1. And 5 times 1 is 5. And now, as you could see, there are no fractions in this equation. Now, if all of this stuff up here was difficult for you to understand, then let me break it up one more time. So again, you're taking the 6, and what I'm doing mentally here, if I write it down, is I'm taking this 6 here, because it's the common denominator of all the fractions, I'm taking 2/3, and I'm multiplying it by the number we picked, which was 6. And when you multiply fractions, again to review, you are allowed to simplify diagonally. So 3 goes into 3 once, so that cancels out, and 3 goes into 6 twice. So then I multiply straight across, and 2 times 2 is 4. And 1 times 1 is 1, so all I'm left with is 4. So that's why this changes to 4p. To demonstrate that again, I'm going to take the 1/2 and I'm going to multiply by the 6 here. And I'm going to cross simplify this 6 and this 2 here. And I know that 2 goes into 6 3 times and 2 goes into 2 once. And then I multiply straight across and we get 3. And then to demonstrate with the 5, 6, we have 5, 6, multiply it by 6, and we can simplify the 6's because 6 can go into itself once. And then multiply straight across, we would get 5 over 1, which is just 5. So this equation we get here is the same thing we had here without having to show all that work. So now that we have achieved clearing the denominator, which gets rid of the fractions, if we choose to do it this way, now I can cover up the variable, and then I'm going to subtract 3, just like we did with all the other problems. And then the very last step, when this is all by itself, we divide. So we're going to divide both sides by 4. Now 4 cannot go into 2. So 2 divided by 4. The denominator cannot go into the numerator value. So that means we will not get an integer as the directions asked. It asked for an integer, or it asked for a simplified fraction. So we're going to take the 2 and the 4. So our answer is 2/4. But instead of 2/4, it's always good, and I want you in this class to simplify it to 1/2. So the answer to this is 1/2.